Good evening. I'm Scott Stark and I'm the Air Center Director. My job is to take care of everything at the Air Center. Basically, I am the guy who works for the city and make sure that everything works well at the airport, both operationally, as we look at improving it, making sure all of those improvement projects go well, taking care of all of the people that work out there and the day-to-day operations. I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about the normal operations, the current operations of the Air Center. So we'll start with the basics. We'll start with the budget. There are three different parts to the budget. There's operations, there's personnel, and there's capital expenditures. Right now, the operations budget for this fiscal year is about $1.7 million. Personnel, we spend almost $900,000. And the capital expenditures, of course, are much higher because that's where the big money is spent. And that's a little bit over $4 million for the projects that we have planned this year. And in case you ever wondered how those projects come about, we go through a 5-year process of capital improvement planning that I'll talk about in a little more depth in just a moment. But all of the projects that we do go through that process. And so this year we'll be working through a couple of projects. Now that I've mentioned the capital improvement plan, I want to talk to you about just a little bit about where that starts. It starts with one of our major relationships that we have at the airport, because our major regulator is the Federal Aviation Administration. So that relationship has a few different pieces to it. The first of those pieces is our program management. We work through an airport district office with a program manager, and one of the main things that we do is that capital improvement plan that I talked about just a couple of moments ago. The capital improvement plan begins in the fall. It's a year-long process, and we go through the possibilities of programs and projects that we want to do, and we work toward a design, a bid, a grant award. In the end, what we wind up with a year later from where we started is a grant awarded to us by the FAA, and a project that's been bid out to a contractor, and somewhere shortly after that we begin the project. So it takes about a year to work through each of these projects. We do them in parallel, so we may have several projects going at the same time, and then they will wind up in the same year. This year we have 2 projects that are going to be on 2 of our taxiways that are getting refurbished, and part of our ramp area where we park the airplanes when they come in and land. Those things will be repair projects and remaking projects. The second part of the relationship that we have with the FAA program management is the grants, which I mentioned, and those are all managed internally between us and the FAA. And we, of course, spend the money on the projects, and then we go back and ask for reimbursement on those grants. The third piece is passenger facility charges, which we charge against our passenger tickets. Every passenger that gets on an airplane in Roswell pays $4.50 of that ticket to the city of Roswell for the infrastructure that we have at our airport. So that goes to improve our terminal, it goes to fix our taxiways, it goes to repair things on the airport. So that's fairly nice. The other piece of the relationship with the FAA, there are 3, is airport certification, which is for the commercial airline service. That's when an airport wants to have commercial airline service, they have to get a certification, a certificate from the FAA, and they have to meet certain criteria. So we met that criteria the first time in 1973, so we have been certified since 1973, held that certification all of that time, and there are certain requirements that we have to uphold, and that's to maintain a certification manual, emergency procedures. We have firefighting requirements, we have staffing requirements, we have a wildlife hazard management program so that we make sure that a deer doesn't wander out onto the runway and a plane hits it. So we have to do things to fence them out and to maybe to trap them and relocate them and those type of things. So those are the type of things that we do all the time. And the last of that part 139 part is regular inspections. My staff does a regular inspection every day of the airport. We inspect every piece of pavement and every sign and every marking on the airport. We inspect the external parts of the airport as well, the fence and the area around the airport. And then we also have a once a year annual inspection that the FAA does. They send out an inspector and they do the same thing. They look at all of those same things and they tell us if we're doing well or if we're not, where we need to improve. The last piece of our relationship with the FAA is compliance. And that's mostly related to how we spend our money, how we structure our staff and how we do our airports. There are 39 grant assurances that we agree to every time we execute a grant with the FAA. And so they come and they make sure that we're complying with those grant assurances. And the other piece for us that's a little unique that other airports don't have, we inherited this airport from the U.S. military, from the Air Force in 1967. So there's a law from 1944 called the Surplus Property Act that we fall under because that land was surplus to us. So we have that piece of compliance in addition to the grant assurances that we have to comply with. So our compliance manager makes sure that we're compliant and helps us if we're not. Moving on to the commercial aeronautical operations at the airport, there are 4 pieces to that. It's air service, aircraft maintenance and repair, research and development, and flight training. So the air service is what everybody sees when you drive up and you park in the front of the terminal, you get on an airplane and you go away. That's what's obvious. In 2019, we had 60,217 passenger enplanements at Roswell. That makes us a small commercial service airport. We are what's called a non-hub, a small airport. What we have had over the years is a growth trend since we started the jet flights in 2007 to Dallas. It picked up a bit with Phoenix. We had 25% year-over-year growth for 2 years after we added the Phoenix flight. But for the last few years, we've had around 5% per year of growth. In this last year, in 2019, we had 6.3% of growth in our passengers. I know that's a lot of numbers to throw out there, but the point of my saying all of that is that we're successful. Our passenger service is successful and growing in Roswell. I want to thank everyone who has bought a ticket and got on an airplane here in Roswell. The one place that we still have left to grow is in that area. People who buy airplane tickets and fly to somewhere that live in the Roswell area, 37% of them buy a ticket and they get on a plane in Roswell. Anywhere between 63 and 64% get on a plane somewhere else. So they'll drive to Albuquerque or they'll drive to El Paso to get on a plane. When we look at growing the airline service here in Roswell and being able to provide extra service, extra destinations, extra airplanes, extra flights, that's the piece of the market that we're primarily looking at. We call that leakage when they go out to another airport to leave from this area. So that 63% is our immediate addressable market. COVID has, of course, slowed that down and pushed our calendar back, but we're looking at adding United, as many of you have heard, and with a flight to Denver. We believe that we'll pick up a large piece of that, the addressable market that we're missing, as well as people that right now will get in their car and drive the 7.5 hours to Denver if that's their destination. We'll pick up some of that traffic as well. So the future of the air service in Roswell looks good once we get past this COVID pandemic. When we first got into the pandemic in March and things started getting locked down, we saw an extreme drop in our passenger enplanements. We lost 95% of our passengers during that time, and that stayed that way through May and maybe into the beginning of June, and then it began to pick back up again. As everyone remembers, we started opening things back up in June, and at that time, some of the restrictions began to relax and the passengers started showing up again. But at the same time, our flight numbers had been cut from 3 Dallas flights a day and 1 Phoenix flight a day down to where it is now, where we only have 1 Dallas flight a day. But that Dallas flight is producing 60% of the passenger enplanements that we had last year in August. So we are recovering. The second piece that I mentioned was the aircraft maintenance, repair, and overhaul. At this time, we have 4 of those companies working in Roswell. We have AirSail, Kavu Aerospace, and General Airframe Support. As of yesterday, there are 480 airliners stored on our airport mostly as a result of the COVID pandemic. That's, for Roswell, the silver lining of this pandemic, that it is a huge economic driver to bring those airplanes in. Every aircraft that we have stored on our airport for the airlines makes us a parking fee every day. There are 3 tiers. There's a $7 tier for the lowest weight, there's a middle of the road $10 tier, and then there's a $14 tier for the heaviest aircraft. That will be changing in January. We've gone to a new fee schedule that is more reflective of the airplanes that we are now storing, because airplanes have gotten so much bigger. Our largest weight really doesn't reflect the size of aircraft that we're storing. So the new system will be predicated on an FAA breakdown system that has 6 categories in it. You don't just park them, tape them up and leave them. They require weekly and monthly maintenance. So that brings jobs to these tenants that are on the airport, these MROs, the maintenance, repair, and overhaul companies. They have added somewhere between 150 and 200 jobs to their ranks at this point, and there probably will be more. We look at probably more aircraft coming in to the point that we actually have to start turning them away. Right now we can probably still hold about another 100 aircraft. Yep, another piece that I mentioned was research and development. The big white canvas hangar on the northwest corner of the airport, that's Sky. What they do is they're researching high altitude blimps, and their blimp has the ability to go up to 65,000 and stay there for long periods of time. So without getting into their business too terribly much, if you can imagine anything that would go on a low Earth stabilized orbit satellite, that would be the same work that would be done from this blimp. The other thing that we have regularly is flight testing. I'm sure that if you've lived in Roswell any period of time, you've seen a lot of jets out of Roswell from Boeing, from Cessna, the Citation jets, from Bombardier, from Mitsubishi, from Beech, from Raytheon, and I can go on and on. Basically, every commercial airplane that has been made in America has been tested at Roswell at one time. So that is still a large piece of what we do. Those aircraft companies come out several times a year, and they test at our airport, because we have a unique runway that's 13,000 feet long, and it's ungrooved, so it meets testing criteria that they have to use. Otherwise, they would have to go somewhere else in the world to do that testing. And the fourth and last piece of our business is flight training. The civilian flight training is a very much smaller piece of that. We have had several different folks that have come through over the years. Right now, there's one private company that's doing flight training. The other piece that we get every day is the military that still uses us out of all the Air Force bases from about 500 miles around. They come by every day and they do touch and goes. And so we're happy to see them. We're happy to support our military that way. What are we going to do in the future? What are we going to look like 5-10 years down the road? Well, that's actually planned out, not really to the T, to the point where we know exactly what building is going where. But what we do have is we have a master plan that is required by the FAA. It was developed in 2012. It's 368 pages long, and I will not go into all of that. But basically, anything about this community, about the airport, about the business, about the aviation side of things, it's all contained in that master plan. And one of the most important pieces of it is that it outlines what we will do with the future, in the future with the land. So it lets us know where we're planning to put certain pieces of our growth on the land that we own. And we own over 4,000 acres at the Air Center. When we look at where a hangar might go, when we look at where a factory might go, we refer to this map in this document. And that helps us stay organized in our future, and things develop in an organized and planned manner. So it's literally our master plan. It's our document that we use. It's our Bible. And it's scheduled to be updated again in 2022. So about every 10 years we update it. And I appreciate your attention. I hope I've been informative tonight, and thanks for joining us.